Good afternoon, book lovers. It's Robert Boyd coming at you with another book report. I'm still in the midst of this long and somewhat difficult book on German philosophy. I doubt if I will be fully up to explaining it, but when I'm finished with it, I'll do my best. But again, as another kind of palate cleanser, because I just need to give my mind a break from phenomenology and so on. Uh, I read this book, a book on Mel Ramos, a relatively minor pop artist from whose fame came in the '60s. And today I'm drinking a cup of herbal tea, and I'm wearing a shirt by another artistic Mel. This is Mel Bachner, a Dallas Cowboys shirt, which is really strange when you think about it, because Mel Bachner is a brainy conceptual artist, yet somehow he got hooked in with the Dallas Cowboys, did a gigantic painting for their stadium, and they made t-shirts and all kinds of merchandise based on it. Anyway, a kind of the exact opposite of him artistically is Mel Ramos. And the book is it's a German publisher, and which will come into play later. Paperback. It's really well made, a physically well made book. Germans know how to make things, and it starts off with a long essay, biographical slash critical essay, but not very critical. It's constantly making excuses for Mr. Ramos, but it does tell you where he came from. He's a Northern Californian guy. He studied at like Sacramento State University, and one of his teachers was Wayne Thiebaud, who also became kind of well known as a pop artist. Although I really wouldn't call him a pop artist, but that's a discussion for another time. And Ramos, well, Thiebaud was a realist at a time when people were studying abstract expressionism in college, and Ramos went in for that right away. And he liked his early work, which you can see in the book, shows heavy impasto, which is definitely reminds you of Wayne Thiebaud's work. And his first series of works that is a recognizable series were all pictures of comic book characters that he had grown up reading in the '40s. People like Batman, Hawkman, Captain Midnight, Human Torch, Phantom Lady, Miss Liberty. And some of these are obviously extremely well known even today, but some of them are kind of obscure. And as he was doing them, he became aware that Roy Lichtenstein was doing something similar on the East Coast. But the difference between Ramos and Lichtenstein is that Ramos was not in any way being ironic. He was deeply in love with these old comic book characters. Whereas Lichtenstein's game was, I think, a little bit more subtle. In any case, he kind of ran out of steam doing the comic book characters. He kind of done all the ones he remembered in the early '60s. And he started going after doing these sort of pin-up images of nude women and pin-up poses, and kind of coy pin-up poses, posing with consumer products. And that's been his shtick more or less ever since, although he's done some variations. And he was imitating, to a certain extent, the pinups of Gil Evgren and Varga that appeared in magazines like Esquire and Playboy. And these were super slick and super smooth. And he imitated that style, which was, basically unblemished skin, no sag, etc., etc. And but in my personal opinion, he was just not as good as those artists, at least not as skilled. But it was a very amusing. I remember thinking, I think I first saw these when I was in high school or maybe college. I remember thinking, oh, that's clever. It was always in a kind of amusing contradiction to put the pinup girl with the consumer product because they were both, products. They were both, they weren't like real things. They were advertisements for a real thing. Um, so I'm going to show you a few of these. What I like about them is he would put the pinup girl next to like the most banal products. So SOS is a perfect example of that. And I think he did this originally in 1965, but then redid it in 2000 for some reason. The Snickers bar where the naked girl is coming out of the wrapper. So she's doubly a consumer product. She's literally there to be consumed. Lola Cola, exactly what you'd expect. Naked girl draped over a gigantic Coca-Cola bottle. Um, Soup cans. This was done actually a lot later than the pop period, but it seems like an obvious reference to Andy Warhol. Um, I do want to talk about this one painting, Have a Havana. Um, what's neat in it? I mean, okay, so it's got this obviously phallic symbol, this gigantic Havana cigar with this sex object in front of it. But what's interesting about it is the shadow she cast. It's the color in the shadow reminds me a lot of how Wayne Thiebaud does his shadows when he draws an object in space that's casting a shadow. And so that use of color in the shadow, I don't want to say it's a West Coast thing, but here are two West Coast artists using it, West Coast pop artists. At some point, Ramos got sick of doing just products and decided to do animals with his pinup girls. And in some ways he's imitating sort of mythological juxtapositions of sex and animals. Think of all these Ovid stories or Leda and the Swan and so on. In some ways, I think he just thinks it's amusing to have this beautiful woman posed with this heinous-looking elephant seal, um, which and I do think that's mildly amusing. And I have to say, when I was a fan of these back in my early days, it was for all the wrong reasons. It's because they were hot. But as a kind of an older guy, I think they're silly, and I don't think they're very well painted when you look at them up close. But they've provided the guy a living for his entire life, and he's never deviated from this formula because I'm going to assume because this is what sells. People like to see pictures of naked ladies, but not everything he's done is naked ladies. So he's aware of other art, not just uh, classical art, and he has a whole series of women in poses made famous by uh, classical artists from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and even 20th century. So lots of versions of Ang and uh, Manet and Boucher and people like that. Guys who also like to paint naked ladies, as well as these really amusing versions of de Kooning women, where it'll be the body will be drawn in de Kooning abstract expressionist style, but then like the head and maybe the boobs will be drawn in his sort of pinup Varga style. But I'm going to show you something totally different. A contemporary of his, maybe a little older, was a guy named Morris Lewis, and he was a color field painter from Washington D.C. And I'm going to show you one of his paintings from 1960. And so you can see in this painting, he basically dripped paint onto the canvas and it's coming in from the sides at an angle. And so basically, uh, 20 years later, Mel Ramos decides to pay homage to it by imagining that those drips are instead flags waving towards each other, and it's I think it's kind of a clever pastiche. Um, and then the last one I want to show is a painting he did. he did several paintings of Galatea from the myth, where she's turning into a statue as she's half this, flesh tone California pinup and half a marble statue. And in this case, she's a marble statue, and sitting next to her is Pan, the god Pan, sporting a gigantic erection, and that is about as sexual as Mel Ramos ever got. Everything is sort of this plastic sexuality, but here's Pan's big, hard dick inserting its way into our conscious in his painting. And if you look at classical statuary of Pan, there's a lot of erect Pans for some reason. Pan, in mythology, was a horny little devil. And Mel Ramos, in reality, I think, was a horny little painter, and not really one who would who made a big impact on art history, but he made a little bit of an impact on, horny teenage Robert Boyd. So good on you, Mel Ramos. It's definitely work that today seems politically incorrect for good reason, and it's popular, or it's retained its popularity, I think, for all the wrong reasons. But it had its moment in time, and when it was an amusing conceit to imagine banal consumer products are the same as images of sexy women. And I think that conceit kind of still holds true. You can see it in advertising every day. Good afternoon. Thanks very much.